What's going on, everybody? This is Dwayne here with e.Piphany, the podcast. And today's special guest is Erin Jones. Erin Jones is a native of Cartersville, Georgia. We actually went to high school together. And she grew up in the vibrant southern community of Cartersville, where she developed a passion for and commitment to service that meets others' needs and ushers in positive transformational change taught to her by her parents, the late Louis and Dolores Jones. This passion and unwavering commitment to service can be seen through her work as a social worker for in the Northwest Georgia and the Metro Atlanta area. Erin possesses the MSW in social work from Kennesaw State University, and she was later licensed as a master social worker in the state of Georgia. Most recently, she started a new business venture called e.Piphany Concepts that serves as an avenue for mental health educational, offering free support groups, seminars, and workshops to aid in eradicating the stigma associated with mental health. Erin possesses a wealth of knowledge from operating in a myriad of capacities throughout her career. I've seen her like on social media. She's doing a lot of speaking engagements around town and on the subject of mental health. And Erin describes her most crowning achievement as being the proud mother of her daughter, Madison McKinney. All right, so today's special guest is Erin Jones, and she is a social worker. And we're here to talk today about mental health. And also, I'd like to, say thank you to Erin because through her, I met my therapist. It was a story where my mom was diagnosed with ALS, and I was sitting at work one day, and I worked in the call center, so you have a lot of downtime. So I'm just scrolling through Instagram, and it's a post. I forgot the post, but you had posted something as I was scrolling through my feed, and I read it, and it had something to do, I guess, like love and like parents and stuff. And I'm like, and the thought just hit me like, man, they just basically gave my mama a death sentence. They like, so it hit me. Yeah. I was like, man, I'm gonna need some help. It hit me right there, and I'm gonna need some help. So I knew that you were involved in the field, so I like hit you up. I had to get off my computer. I go down the elevator into the lobby. I'm like, hey, because I was crying and stuff. I'm like, yeah, this gonna be it. So I called in, and she definitely hooked me up with my current therapist or whatever. And once again, thank you for that.
Of course.
All right, and so Erin, if you could just go, explain to us and give us how you got into your history, how you got into social work or therapy or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, it was a winding road. Actually, I had always since Mr. Pinker. That's a name probably you haven't heard in forever. He had a career connections class, and we took like aptitude tests to see like kind of like what we wanted to do. And so I was stuck on being a speech pathologist. Like that's really what I wanted to do. And I kept that was probably my sophomore year in high school. And I kept that with me, for a really long time. And I was at Georgia Highlands. So I became a mother when I was really young, 19. And as I was going to school, I was taking like prereqs at Floyd, Georgia Highlands now.
Right.
And I don't know what it was that just made me say, Lord, if this is not like what I'm supposed to be doing, start opening up the doors for what I'm actually supposed to be doing. And I don't know what was going on. I don't know why that was a prayer of mine or whatever. And like being a single mom, a young mom, I come from a 2-parent home. My parents always worked. So I had never really interacted with like DFACs and, food stamps and Medicaid and all of those kinds of things because we, were insured through my dad's job and, all of these kind of things. So I started interacting with those systems, and some of the experiences were very positive and some of them were extremely negative because like they were talking to me like I was like dense or like clueless and I'm thinking, like, what I'm saying? I'm Erin Jones. I'm going to college. Like,
right.
What are you, like, I need a little help with some daycare money, but like, be clear, like I am a brilliant person. That was the 19-year-old in me that was just like, buck.
Right.
So through that experience, and when I prayed that prayer, I kind of just started taking the classes, and I was taking like an elective. I mean, well, it's not an elective. The Psych 101 is pretty much part of the course, so you can be like well-rounded and stuff. And I got super interested in that. And then there was a human services degree at Georgia Highlands and Associates. And so I was always like thinking, okay, like 10 steps ahead. Part of that being because like I just got officially diagnosed as being neurodivergent. So always thinking and always moving ahead. And so I started taking those classes, and then it was just so fascinating to me, and I just stuck with it. Got my associate's degree. During that time, my mother passed. And it was so crazy because I had one class left to take, but they only offered it like once a year, and it was the death and dying class.
Right.
So there's a death and dying class. In the human services, the associates, human services at Georgia Highlands. I don't know if that's still a part of the curriculum, but it most certainly was then. So it was the last class I had to take before like finishing to go on to Kennesaw, because they had an undergrad in human services. So our bachelor's. So literally it's only offered like once a year. I got special permission to take the class by myself, in which I had to like plan a funeral, my own funeral, write my own obituary and all this kind of stuff. And literally like 6 to 8 months later, I really had to do all of this stuff because my mom passed. And when I say, like, I truly believe that God's hand was in all of this, he orders our steps, even though they are sometimes very difficult steps. But I can honestly say that was like a part, like it was an independent study. So there was nobody else but me. Like I remember one of the assignments, I'm gonna have to hit my teacher up and ask her, because she's still there. Do they still do the scavenger hunt in the cemetery where you find like the oldest epitaph, like you find a young child's epitaph, like to really get you like acclimated with this? Little did I know I would go on, and most of my career would be in hospice social work. So it was just like, oh my gosh, like when I look at it now, I'm like, dang, like that is so wild how it was orchestrated, and it wasn't planned. It just was the way, that it happened. So so then throughout, when I first went into hospice, which literally I only took because it makes more money than DFACS, to be honest. Like getting in healthcare. I didn't even know the lady who referred me. I just had an MSW. She recommended me on the strength of Erica Slocum, like my cousin, like because she knew her, and she was like, well, if they are first cousins and they both work at DFACS, then she must be like a good person, or like whatever. So that started, and then my administrator, Jody Temples, he was like on my tail about getting licensed, and so because it wasn't required at the time, and I'm so glad I listened to that, because it really started to change like the trajectory of my career. I knew I could be licensed, but I never really had any interest in it because I didn't think I would ever be a therapist now with my own practice. So
all right, so I try to do research before I do a podcast or whatever, and I see that as a therapist, you have a therapist. So and I mean, like I stated earlier, I'm in therapy, and I've often wondered, I'm like, do you go see somebody? Like, how do you deal with all the stories and people come to you? I guess I don't want to use the word dumping, but I guess that is the appropriate word, dumping.
I mean, that's it. On you. Or just being supportive in that way, because it's very intimate. It's most of the time people who are coming to us are not coming to us with good news necessarily. We have those flashes of that goodness or whatever, but most of the time we are working with very heavy information. And so what I would say, if there's anybody that ends up listening that decides to ever go into this kind of work, is like utilize all of your supervision, like where you have professors that you can talk about your cases to, because you have to process through this too, because like secondary and vicarious trauma, those are real things. And hearing all of these stories, especially if it's something that you've been through personally, it's hard, and it's hard to navigate, and it's hard to manage. And I think for me, when I was in graduate school, I was only like 2 years removed from the passing of my mom. And I was still in such denial that I was not okay. Like, so I started having panic attacks when I was in graduate school and I still didn't realize this is happening to me because it's stirring up my stuff. And I still, like, I was 26. So, like, while I was really intelligent, I guess, or whatever, where you are developmentally at 26 and how you are vain, you think well, I'm getting a degree in this, so surely I'm fine, and all of those things. I finished my master's in 2008. I didn't go to therapy for the first time until 2014, when my dad was sick and was about to die. I didn't know that, I didn't know how ill he was at the time, but just the stressors even leading up to that, again, stirring up all of those things. So it's like, I was operating from this space of Brene Brown, who is, she's a social worker also, very popular author. She's Oprah approved, and
she is a social worker. I didn't know that. I mean, I've read her books and stuff.
She has her doctorate in social work, and she's what she calls herself is a shame researcher. So she talks about how when you offer help to people, but you won't take that same help, that you're operating really from like a judgmental space. And I was like, oh my gosh, me.
So okay, yeah, because now you're shining a light on me, because I guess I like to, I guess I'm independent to a fault. I like to handle, like, I got it. And plus, I want to feel like I'm not bothering people. I guess that's the biggest thing. Like, I know you got stuff to do.
Yeah.
And so how do you, not to cut you off, I'm sorry.
How do you no. I was just going to say, but that is a lesson that has to be learned. And, happy Juneteenth to everybody out there that may be listening, but particularly as Black people, our assimilation to the majority culture, when we're communal people, baby, we come from a village. You know what I mean? Like, we're supposed to be interdependent. And the bootstrap theory, and you need to do it on your own, and this very individualistic idea in some cases has been helpful, but for most people, it has been like to our detriment that we don't reach out for help. And there is a lot of shame associated with that, even though there shouldn't be. I carried a lot of shame for a long time because I was a young mom. I grew up in church, like, the position that I put my family in, to now have to consider a whole nother life, a whole, all of these kind of things. So my achieving was based, a lot of it, in shame. Like, I've done this, so now I got to earn my keep. If I would have done things like just in a perfect world, I would probably be a recording artist. That's probably what I would have done. But I was also good in school too. And so I was like, well, thank God I can just go, get some degrees and, take care of this child that I have. And so in the process, of doing that, I needed a lot of support. I needed support as a single mom. Like, my mom wasn't a single mom. So even though she helped me a lot, she didn't really understand, that piece and the depth of that, and just the exhaustion of it all. And I would always, because I carried this shame and this belief, I would always, be leery to ask people for help, when I needed it, not ever considering. And I think I've just really, now that she's 26 or almost 26, I don't think I ever really just considered all that I have handled over time. And she's not just like an average kid. She has done exceptionally well. And thanks to God, what I was instilled with, and also my village, but just always carrying a lot of shame because I didn't have a lot of extra money to save, and I didn't have a lot of extra this or whatever, not considering, hey, I don't have parents to ask for money. I don't have like that extra layer of support. Like, it's on me. And whatever, child support I got till she was 18, like, I'm gonna have to make it happen with this little bit. But, thanks be to God, along the way, we found grants, we found, family that, when we got in a tight, I would even often be found asking at the last minute for stuff because I was
Right.
so embarrassed. I couldn't like bring myself to do it. But then when it was for her, I would just be like, it's for
Right.
Madison. So like, help us if you can.
I got you. And I guess I feel you in the aspect of shame because I guess I'm being transparent now. I'm an alcoholic. I used to party a lot, drink a lot, and do a whole bunch of drugs. And like you, growing up in Cartersville,
Sure.
I went to the Alexander United Methodist Church, and so up on Poole Street. So it's like I was always in the church choir and doing all this stuff. And so when I started getting, I guess, DUIs and getting in trouble in college or whatever, it was the shame of like, it's like two different lives almost. Because in Savannah,
Sure.
I was a totally different person. But when I
Sure.
came home, it's like I don't know if I guess that is the word. I masked.
Yep.
Around my family, it's like, oh, this Dwayne. Like some of my family members do, like, nah, this boy get wild. But then,
Right.
my life down in Savannah was totally different. But then, like graduating from college and then trying to get jobs, where I noticed on the job applications, it used to say, "Have you ever?" It used to say, "Have you ever been convicted of a felony?" And I could easily just check no, because I haven't.
Mm-hmm.
Now the applications, they switched over and started saying, "Have you ever been convicted of any crime? If so, list all of them." So I'm like, man, I got 3 DUIs, 3 driving on suspended licenses. And for me, it was a shame of having to put all that stuff down that I didn't, I guess, fully apply myself to jobs because I felt the shame. So so I guess my question is, after you felt the shame, how do you get over the shame? Or what did you do to or some steps to, I guess, get over if someone out there is feeling shame for whatever position they're in, how do you get out of that or get over it?
I really started, and I mean, with the help of my therapist, just started talking about like what made me do some of the things that I was doing, or made me feel that way. And the more that we would just talk about it and unearth those things, then I started realizing I needed to be kinder to myself because I had been through a lot in my lifetime up until that point. And it was just like, I mean, you have to really work on it, but you have to really get comfortable with your trauma and understand it, and understand that some of the things, like a person who is well and who is educated and all of these things is not just going to go and get a DUI. Like that's not repeatedly knowing the consequences. And so like, it's like, and not even unwell, like, oh, he crazy. Like, no, something is not right. Something, there's got to be an explanation behind this. And I think when we start to look at addiction, when we start to look at people who repeatedly make, choices that don't benefit their highest self, like looking at that and saying like, what is going on? Part of it could be social learning. Part of it is genetics. If you come up in a home where emotions, and I mean, the school that our parents came from, that philosophy and those, that mentality, they weren't talking about anything.
Oh no, yeah, they don't compute. Yeah,
it was like, when I think of like Christmas, like in the mission where my dad is from, and I mean, we had alcoholism on both sides, but particularly on my dad's side, when I think about Christmas in the mission, we always go down to my Aunt Brandy's and Robinson. Like we go down to her house and she's got the red tablecloths and all this kind of stuff. But ever so often you see in a Crown Royal bag, and like all of and it was a part of the culture. Of it was a cultural thing. It was, in the spirit of Juneteenth, and we're talking about freedom. We didn't really talk about our feelings as a people, and we weren't allowed. And we were seen as, subhuman and all of these different things. So even those things like have a bearing on how we process our stuff, even now. And some of the beliefs that we have that we still carry are in fact very toxic. And, that's just the way that it is. Like we didn't talk a lot when you talk about people coming out of segregation, when you talk about our grandparents and other generations, like they were literally trying to survive. So it wasn't no time for no emotional conversations. Right. Hell, we got to live. Like we got to, right. There's no going up the chain of Maslow's hierarchy of need to self-actualization. Like, no, like we got to make sure our family has this. And, you know, I'm trying to sharecrop, or I'm trying to farm, but they're giving, and I need more money, but there's predatory lending going on, and they're going to take this and all of those kind of things. So they couldn't go up. You know,
what stuck in survival. I guess survival mode, I guess.
Absolutely. And so now the luxury that we have that they did not have is therapy and going to understand those other parts of us that have been suppressed, because as a people, we're expressive in the dance, right. How we dress, the gold teeth. I mean, like all of those that date back to Africa. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like all of those things that have been so suppressed, you know, now we're getting to tap back into that. Now I can say, oh, I got this, you know, piercing, and I can go to work at Northside and be, you know, a professional and still, right. You know, all of those kinds of things. So, you know, it's just been an unfolding. It's our own personal histories and how we grew up, but it is also very much, you know, culturally what has gone on too that has affected our mental health.
Okay. So, like I said, I try to do research on everyone that I interview or whatever. And another one, something that sort of kind of that I read about you that I guess I associated with myself was being a people pleaser. And for me, as you talked about, I guess peeling back the layers and stuff, it was, for me personally, it was like growing up, you know, I was sort of kind of, I was chubby, I was a little fat kid, you know, then I slimmed up, then I got fat again, you know, off and up, you know, but trying to fit in and be, you know, middle school, high school, trying to fit in, have friends and things of that nature. And you start, I guess, pleasing people or not speaking up for yourself in order to fit into certain groups. Sure. And so, and how do you, and I'm just not really learning that myself. And so I'm working through it now. How do you compensate, or how do you, if you are a people pleaser, or if you notice that you're not being yourself, how do you work out of it or get out of it? Or what are some steps that you can give to possibly for those people that might think that's going through that?
Well, I think that a lot of it comes when you get pissed off enough, like, stop doing it. Usually when it really hits the fan is when you have burned out, like, or you reach this place of burnout because you're so overwhelmed. Because, right. Like, literally you're trying to please everybody. And for me, my people pleasing came a lot from like childhood stuff.
Right.
You know, I was always like the smart kid and, you know, right. All those kind of things. And so I just learned very early on just to kind of go with the flow. And sometimes that just ended up being to my detriment. A lot of times we talk a lot about fight or flight, but there are also some other responses to anxiety called fawn and freeze. So fawning is where, like, you just don't say anything. You just keep it inside. You know, I'm doing this to keep the peace, but there's no peace inside of you because you're angry or because you feel slighted or whatever the case may be. And so what started happening was it just began to be too much because you start to feel this physically. Like I'm about to get into probably another certification. I haven't decided what I want to do, but just something about body work and how, you know, because even when you were talking about drinking and stuff, like that's to numb because you start to feel all of these things in your right. body. It's in your stomach or whether you carry the stress. I know I carry a lot of stress here in my hip, like just bracing all the time, you know, all of those kinds of things. And so the biggest thing is understanding that boundaries. I had a quote on my story yesterday, and I had posted it before, but I love it every time I see it. It's like boundaries don't have to be like a barbed wire fence, like don't do this and that. It just can be a consistent shining light, just to say, treat me with respect. And like I said, sometimes you don't get to that point until like it's been a lot of things and you've held it all in, and then it's like you explode because you never metered that anger appropriately. And I think you know, you were a firstborn, I'm the oldest girl. Like there are certain expectations that even go like in birth order, for there's a psychology even to that, you know, how you kind of navigate the world. So when I first started having boundaries and first started telling people no, like it would make me like so anxious and so like nervous. I mean, it would be, I would say no, but then I would come home, I'd cry.
Second guess yourself, right?
Yeah, because it's so different. And what that is really based in is like a fear of abandonment. And like with my parents, my dad dealt with alcohol addiction. My mom was heavy in the church, but it was a lot for me that was missing. Now, there was a period of time when my mom stayed at home, like she was a homemaker, and she was at home for like a couple of years. And I don't know if having all that attention, and then when she went to work, I don't know if she was like, I don't know if my little mind interpreted that as a rejection, but definitely with them being busy, the way I got attention was through school. Like that's, or if I was singing, or if I was doing something performative, you know? And so that's what I did. I would always just stay in the good girl lane, even though I wanted to pop people, even though I wanted to act out and do like a lot of things, you know. I still, you know, just was like, well, okay, you know.
Gotcha.
And that kind of thing. So, but you, at some point, you have got to honor yourself. And when you don't, and when you please people and you allow them escape accountability, and you allow them, like, they don't get what they need from life for you trying to please and absolve what they do. It's like, no, like they need to meet some of these consequences, even if it's your mad side, you know, to say, I'm not doing that, you know, and that kind of thing. So it was hard at first, but I'm getting very comfortable with no as a complete sentence. And no.
She said I'm getting very comfortable.
But it's still learning for sure.
Gotcha. All right. So what if it's family? Because, you know, family, when it comes to family, those are the people that we try to please the most.
Sure.
Because they are your family, you know, say parents, aunts, uncles, things of that nature.
Right. So I'm gonna steal this insight. I'm gonna restate this insight that there is a really cool psychologist instructor, I think at Tennessee State, maybe Meharry also. Her name is Dr. Raquel Martin. And she said, you know the quote that says blood is thicker than water?
Right. Yeah.
So that's not actually what the quote says. It says the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. So what that means is the people that show up for me, who may not be biologically related to me,
right?
Those are my people. That's my tribe. And that can be thicker. The covenant and going through hard times together sometimes is much more than what you receive at home. Because, see, we always have these issues with family because of what family is supposed to be. But everybody's experience is not that. Everybody doesn't come up in a loving home. Everybody doesn't come up with parents that want the best for them. I know parents that compete with their children. I know siblings that compete with each other. Like, I remember when for the Black Excellence Awards, like the first year, my brother and I were nominated in the same category. Now, how I looked at that, how he and I looked at that is like, oh, wow. Like, and especially we always think back to, you know, mom and daddy because they're not here anymore or whatever, what they tried to instill. And I was like, what a testimony. And my sister was nominated in the hairstylist category, all in that same first year. And I was like,
your parents did a good job. They raised extra.
And there were people like, I know know y'all in the same category. And I'm thinking, we were in the same womb. Okay. Like, not
Right.
at the same time, but in the same, like, I don't identify with that kind of stuff. But I also have worked enough and experienced enough things to know that everybody doesn't come up like that. So a lot of family is the only group of people that we allow to repeatedly like violate us. And, you know, and we just have to start having the mindset that, you know, like the boundary is universal. Blood ties don't have anything to do with that. And I know that that's easier said than done because, again, it's an abandonment issue. I don't want Jen to be mad at me. I don't want Dick to be mad at me. I don't want Quincy to be mad at me. Or, I mean, just for example, but but it's real though. And you gotta have those boundaries and you gotta protect yourself. And I don't know why people get so caught up. And I mean, I get that everybody doesn't come from like a Judeo-Christian background or whatever, but even for those of us that do, and even when you go Cain and Abel, jealous, and like that was family, you know, like there's so many specific examples within like the Bible and probably other religious texts as well, where that kind of thing and like family doesn't get a pass. If anything, we should love each other and be protective of each other, not be like a source of stress and animosity. But if the system is dysfunctional, I mean, that can happen, you know?
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. I mean, and I guess thank you for bringing clarification to that particular quote, because I've always heard it stated that way. Blood is thicker than water. I haven't heard, I guess, the full quote in its full context or whatever. But once you hear it in its full context, it brings light that
it's just something that's rewritten, like most things in history have been, to keep manipulation on the strong suit. And it's like, no, like you can't do me like. Not only can like now will I tolerate, just for example, some things from Jenny that I won't tolerate from the rest of the world? Of course, because there is a covenant even with us. We grew up together. Like this is my sister. Like, you know, all of these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, when the love is real, at some point you would hope that people, you know, would I shouldn't say if the love is real, because people conceptualize that in different ways. But when it's healthy for both of you, when the relationship is a healthy love, then the other person is not going to ask the other person to
do something crazy. Right. I got you. And I get it. Yeah. And so, all right, now you stated something a little, I guess, in that explanation, abandonment. Now, what exactly, what is abandonment for those that might not know what it is?
So abandonment, typically when we think about abandonment issues and things, we think about a parent who was just never there, just not present. You know, a single parent home is usually what we think about, just on a certain level. But if a parent is in the home, it can be a 2-parent home. And that's a big misnomer too. Kids do thrive and do better in a 2-parent home when it's healthy, you know, but once the system is, you know, if it's unhealthy more than it's healthy, then you end up with the same issue. So a parent can be there. A parent having addiction automatically sets you up for abandonment issues. Like, even though my dad was not the type of person who drank and didn't pay the bills or anything like that, like my mama knew exactly where he was when he was drinking, like all of the things, but there was still something that told me like he would choose that over you know what I mean? And so an addiction automatically puts that there. An abandonment, a child could feel an abandonment when there's a new baby to come in and there's no explanation about, I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to hold the baby and I'm going to have to do certain things that you don't need for me to do anymore, or different things like that, or just being intentional about the parenting. And again, going back to our parents' generation, it wasn't a whole bunch of talking like that. Like it was just, This is what it is. You just kind of grab context clues from the air and
right.
what's going on around you, which is why most of us end up in therapy, because we're trying to make sense. Like, we're literally trying to make sense of, like, why is this like this? Like, why? You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like, because we misinterpreted some things along the way. So a parent can be in the home but still not be present. You can provide for a child's physical needs and still not be emotionally present, because we're not just people who need to eat. Like, we need to be, all of these things need to be cultivated, you know, within us. And if our parents don't have that, you know, my mom, she was very progressive in a lot of ways. It was the weirdest thing when I think back. I remember she gave me this book, and I found the books on Amazon, actually, and I just, ADHD child, I forgot to order them. So I hope I can find them again. I'm gonna do that when we get off. So I can get them and just have them. But she got me 2 books when I was a little girl, and like I said, she was at home with me when I was really young. And so I knew how to read early, like, just a lot of different things. And so one of the books was called About the Handicaps, because, I mean, it was the early 80s, and that's the term that we used at that time. And then the other one was about the dying. And so literally they were children's books about, there was a little kid in the book about dying. It was, the first story was about a child losing a pet, and then a child losing their grandfather. And then the book about the handicap, it was a young man. He had, he was probably, from what I can remember, maybe about 8, but he had like cerebral palsy. So she was already teaching me, like, about diversity and how people are different, and also about death and dying, not knowing, you know, she would leave me early. And then to be honest, my mom was kind of later in her birth order. So my grandparents were older. We experienced, I wrote down one day, like, my loss history, like significant losses. And by the time I was like 10, I had lost a lot. 11 was my final, I think. Well, no, I didn't lose my last grandparent until I was like 21. But in the interim, in the mix of that, uncles and aunts, like, deaths, lengthy illnesses, like 2 of my grandparents on both sides had Alzheimer's. So I saw caregiving, just a lot of things that probably some of our friends and family weren't really seeing at my age, at the age when I saw those things. So, you know, it was just like, oh my gosh, like a lot. And so those perceived, even though what they didn't maybe mean that, those perceived abandonments and, you know, needing somebody to show up. I can remember my parents both worked, but I played ball after school. There was really no way that they could make it to my games, maybe until like the last part. But then, you know, who wants to pay admission, you know, to see 3 minutes or 4 minutes or whatever the case. But I sometimes would perceive those things as they don't care about me, or they don't care, like, what I have going on. And it wasn't always that, you know. So like I said, going to therapy to kind of clear up some of those kinds of things. So abandonment can be a range of things. It could be the most obvious. Even when a parent dies, a child, adult or young, suffers, you know, from abandonment issues and different things like that. So, you know,
I guess I get that. You know, when my mom died, I don't know if it was selfish on my part or whatever, but I was like, well, damn, you know, I ain't get to have kids yet. You know, my mama, like, Quincy has his kids, you know, they at least got to meet her, you know. So it's like, for me, it's like all they're gonna hear is stories and see pictures. And I felt some type of way. And I did.
But I think that's appropriate. That's appropriate. I don't think that's selfish at all. I think that is real. And I think the way that we grew up, again, like in church, and not that, and let me just say that if I hadn't had like just a faith relationship, my spirituality has played a lot in being able to be resilient, to survive and maintain with a lot of the things that I have dealt with in my lifetime. But also, we have to realize, that while there are several, you know, spiritual things that take us to this better place and all of these, that at the end of the day, I shared on another podcast where I was a guest. I was like, there would be Sundays that I would go to church and I'm looking around and everybody just go on as normal and church is normal and all this kind of stuff. And I'm looking at the seat where she used to sit. And I'm thinking, do y'all not see that she's not here and my world is flipped upside down and all of those things? And so not only, so my mom did get to know Madison, but she was 5 when she passed. So every time she hit any kind of like a major milestone, it would trigger that sadness, or that like, And so now, because I've gotten more accustomed to it, now how I view it is, you have got to be up there pulling strings for this girl, because some of the things that she has experienced and working for like she's in LA working for the Dodgers right now. Like knows not a soul. Like God completely opened that door. But I mean, I think my mom helped hold it open a little bit and say, that's my grandbaby. And like, or whatever. And so, we come up with these things in our minds to help us cope, sometimes with the pain of that, because she invested, even in 5 years, she put I was in college, I still lived at home, but if I hadn't had my mom like pouring into her just like she did me with, with reading and all this kind of stuff, I still have drawings that she kept that Madison did. So she could tell me, this girl is exceptional. Like, look at this. She shouldn't be drawing this at this age and she shouldn't be doing all of these things. And so she was like, my mom was super progressive, like I said, but she was still human too. So there were some areas in which she missed it with me, just like Madison will say the same of me. Even in my best of efforts, where I could have done some things better, and so, yeah. So that's huge in your own healing journey. Like, why is it important for me to know like my parents' story and to understand them and all of that? Because it really shaped who you are and and who you'll be in parenting or marriage or whatever. But I definitely, can commiserate with you on that, because those times are the hardest too, because like it's when you realize like, dang, they are really gone. And I still say that after 20 years, that my mother's been gone, 10 years that my dad's been gone. So
and I guess I like the way that you're reframing it or changing your perspective as like she's gone, but she's helping. She's still with us and she's able to help us out, and from up there, because maybe she's able to see something that we can't see and navigate.
Still parenting, still mothering.
Right. Now, you said something a little earlier that sort of kind of, I guess it triggered me or whatever. ADHD. How do you know if you have ADHD? Because I think I got it. Is there a test for it? Who would I need to go see?
Well, when you initially said, when you were giving me my pre-interview or the pre-work before we came on, you were like, if I interrupt you, don't think I'm being rude. I was like, I wouldn't think that, because I do that too sometimes. Just the excitement, because your thoughts are going so fast. And so
right.
There are several different things. And I think, people say all the time, well, I think that, I think that we all have a little bit of that. And so they kind of, and I agree, because our society kind of makes us be multifaceted instead of like a one track or whatever. Like we always have to kind of manage multiple things. Right. But like when it impairs like your functioning, like if you know that it takes you longer, like for me with women, Black women, usually aren't diagnosed until like 30s, 40s or whatever, because boys usually get diagnosed sooner, because most of the time it shows out in their hyperactivity is in their behavior. With women, it's hyperactivity of thoughts. So everything that has to do with organization, formulating things, executive functioning in the brain is what ADHD affects. And so, like I said, I have like the most challenging kind, which is inattentive and hyperactivity. So it's like I zone out sometimes. Like when I hyper focus, like I am locked in. But and a lot of different things like can dysregulate me. It's hard for me to get back started, and all these kind of things. Once I get like off track, and it's really, and I think my daughter was such a good source of motivation and dopamine, it would make me go. But now that she's grown, like I have found myself having to put more systems in place to keep myself on track because I don't have to attend to her like I used to.
Right.
Like I didn't have to be so involved. So
Right.
the push sometimes, and I think because I've pretty much overfunctioned also all of my life, like I have to have like some level of slowness, you know?
Right.
So, yeah.
And the reason,
But
why I'm asking, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, well, the reason, because for me,
no, go ahead. It was a little bit of a delay.
yeah. For me, like you said, it's the overthinking, and then I guess I need to constantly be stimulated. I keep a podcast, I keep something going on all the time. But then again, I like to learn, and I like to learn new stuff, even if it's something I know I ain't gonna never use. But at least if it ever comes up, it's like
focusing, you go on deep dives about stuff.
Yeah. Like I ain't gonna never use this, but it's interesting for the moment, and it might come up in the future. I don't know, but yeah, I remember I used to tell my mama, like back in school and stuff, like, Mama, I don't know what's going on. Like for me to focus, I have to really. I don't need no sound. Well, sometimes I can do music, but it's like I just need to be by myself and be with the music. If I'm around other people, I can easily be over here and get discombobulated and all up in some other stuff. So that's why I always thought, like, something's wrong with me. I don't know exactly what it is, but I've been trying to figure it out.
Wrong. You just process in a different way. And I think whatever we don't understand, most of the time we demonize. You got to think, put the, again, put in the factors of like lazy, scattered, all these kind of things. And it's like, no, I'm not any of those things. It's just I process differently. I need a little more time sometimes. And and it's hard because it affects your self-esteem too, because you don't always necessarily perform consistently. And you're like, why can I do this Tuesday? And now I can't do that.
Right.
How do I get back there? So it's a lot that you have to rectify, even with that. And it's a lot. But the more that I have come to understand that, I've come to understand and be accepting of myself and be like, oh my gosh, like, girl, you were neurodivergent functioning in a neurotypical world. Like, and you've done well, and your baby has done well. And I was like, so in retrospect, I'm like, maybe that's why I only have one child, because I wanted more children, you know what I'm saying? And different things like that. I'm good. I'm straight now, but it different things. Like you said, just seeing God just sees so much farther ahead, and all of that. So all right. I would definitely, if you still have concerns, I would talk to your primary care doctor. And maybe like what I did was I kept talking to him about it, and I was like, I'm just having a hard time. Like I was like, I could normally do this, and I was just really struggling. And over the last couple of years, it got to be like a real struggle, like to work, to do all kinds of things. And then I mean, also like I dealt with anxiety and depression a long time, untreated. And just the ebbs and flows of life that come along with those things. So, I started therapy in 2014, like 10 years ago. So, I mean, off and on, more on than off though. And, now I'm just kind of in the space of like navigating, okay, so how do I need to structure my day now? How does this need to look? I need to schedule breaks throughout my day and, all of those kinds of things. So, but I'm Juneteenth couldn't have been a more perfect day. Like really talk to your healthcare providers, especially, Black and brown folks, because we know that discrimination is in there. Like I may have to go for 6 visits for somebody to hear me say something, as opposed to, my counterparts that can get that script on the first time, or whatever. But I'm very fortunate to have an amazing doctor, and he sent me to go actually get tested by a psychologist. And I'm thinking, Dwayne, I'm in there thinking, oh, I'm killing this. Like, I'm killing this. Right. I came out, and he was like, wow. Like, you are combined type. So you got all these thoughts, and then, like, squirrel. Like, yeah. Literally that.
Yeah. All right. So what exactly is? So I know we're getting close to the hour. So I'm gonna try to. I got like two questions. So,
Okay, cool.
what is neurodivergent then?
Okay, so it just means that your brain doesn't function like in typical ways. So ADHD is actually, it fits on the spectrum of autism. Asperger's being a higher functioning type, where you have like all of this intellect, but you're socially a little strange, and awkward and all of those kinds of things. So it's just anything that's divergent just means that it's not like most. And even on the spectrum, like you can be on the spectrum and not fully be, because autism, can go all the way to nonverbal, the head banging, like the processing issues, the sensory issues. And I have a lot of those things too.
Right.
Like, I don't like my food, like to touch, and like different things that I just thought were just my little quirks and idiosyncrasies about myself, but it may very well be tied to that. So it just means that you process, a little differently than most. And the things, like particularly with ADHD, like organization, like I would be like, why am I so tired after going to the grocery store? And nobody loves the grocery store, but it would just be like, oh my gosh. And I would have I like to shop at Aldi. I like to shop at the same stores where I'm very familiar, because I can get distracted and overspend. And that leads to other issues and different things like that. And like people say, yeah, everybody has like a little bit of that, but it was starting like in certain ways to be like debilitating. So like Instacart and stuff like that, even though I have to pay a little extra fee, if I can just bring the groceries to me and I know exactly what the meals I'm gonna cook and I know exactly what I need, like that's helpful for me. You know what I'm saying? And so, so the neurotypical is like, I can function in all of these different ways. Like according to what's regular, whatever is deemed the norm, and without, and I can adjust, and that's fine. And neurodivergent just means different. And that would just depend on the individual's like situation.
Okay. And I know I said I had two questions, but then when you talked about Asperger's, because I hear, D.L. Hughley, on one of his comedy specials, he's always talking about his son, and the way he talks about his son has Asperger's. The way he talked about him, I thought the guy, like his son was like, what's the word I want to use? I'm trying to be politically correct.
But like a little more like inept, but he's like a regular dude.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So I was like,
I knew where you were going.
Right. So but it's not that. It's just that he more than likely his son is actually very highly intellectual. It's just that he just has quirks.
Okay. Yeah. And very like unfiltered, like we'll say, whatever.
Okay, gotcha.
That kind of thing. So yeah. They have a hard time picking up on like social cues, personal space. Like most of the time they don't want to be bothered anyway, but like just certain things they might say, like, oh God, your stomach is big, and just keep on moving, like, and the person might be crushed, but they don't pick up on any of that.
I got you. All right. So you are the owner of e.Piphany Concepts, which is your business or whatever. And if you could just sort of kind of go into what areas that your niche at e.Piphany, and also after that, just like what are your goals for the next 5 years as far as like you personally building your brand in the mental health field, and your goals for your business as well.
Okay. Awesome. So like it started as just really, at the time it wasn't even a practice. Okay, so e.Piphany Productions, like when I used to sing and gig.
So I started with productions, huh?
Like it was like gonna be like a production company, like for my songwriting and like different things like that. And just over time, as I evolved and became a clinician and all these kind of things, I was like, I still love that name. It means epiphany in like the Christian sense. It means like it is described as when like the three wise men went to go see Jesus and they had a revelation, epiphany of who he was. And so the E, of course, people call me that as a nickname. And it was just about self-revelation, like revelation of yourself. So that's how like that all came about, the name. And then as time went on, like I developed the support group, which I haven't done since COVID because we just never could find a space, and then everything just kind of changed. But I ran it, for 5 years free of charge to our community for people who had lost loved ones, and it was a mutually beneficial situation. I had just lost my dad, therefore making me like an adult orphan at 34, and so like going through that and just more licensure and more training and just I just hate for people to feel like they're alone. I have always hated that. And that partially, I think, I know it came from me kind of feeling different and alone, and nobody understands what I'm going through and all these kinds of things. But the more that we share and we talk about our situations and our circumstances, we'll sound like with you talking about within 10 minutes of you talking, I could already identify several things where we were similar, which we already knew, but like it just reaffirms that, we aren't in this world alone. And it is good to have like additional support. So through that, in the next 5 years, I'm, writing a grief workbook, and my adaptation, like at first, when I first started, it was definitely about bereavement, but like the topic of grief is so expansive, even to the point of like grieving dreams. I had to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to parent any more children. You know what I'm saying? I had to come to terms with that. Like, we have our plan. I was supposed to be married by now, Dwayne. Now. And I haven't been married, and just all of these different things. So even the grief sometimes that comes with not being where I thought I would be, or life not being how I thought it would be, because some people never get past that. They get so rigid on, they don't have the adaptability or the flexibility. And that's why therapy is helpful also, because it teaches you to release some of those expectations that maybe weren't in your best interest, or that just wasn't the way that things went. And like, how are you going to go? So within the next few years, I hope to be just on more platforms, particularly, I think all spaces, but I definitely am looking to do more in the faith-based space, just because like we just still don't understand that like you don't have to choose between Jesus or your therapist or whatever, however you identify spiritually or whatever, like, but your spirituality is a part of your mental health and your health and a part of your being. So it's like, particularly though for me in churches, like everything is not a demon. Like sometimes it is the way your brain works, and sometimes like, but it isn't. And there are people that genuinely do believe that. And so imagine the esteem of a person who's facing bipolar disorder or whatever. And not that it's not spiritual, because we don't wrestle with flesh and blood or whatever, but like it is a spiritual piece. But there's also like hypertension because of stress. It shows up in your body, but it's because of stress that you can't see. Right. So it's like, so marrying those two ideas, that it's still an act of faith that you go, it's an act of faith every time you take your high blood pressure medicine, because you don't know what it is. Really. You're just trusting that doctor has done their work and that pharmacy is honest, and you're getting the right pill because it says something on the bottle. Like literally everything we do is an act of faith, and it's an act of trust. So I think where people get lost in the sauce is because you can't see emotions. Like you kind of, give it your own explanation about what it is, when there's a very scientific fact, and the science behind it is spiritual also. Like, it's not, So so that's the biggest wall I keep, hitting in some areas.
Gotcha. And I know I said that's okay, but this is my last question, because you touched on something else. Okay. Like I said, when you touch on stuff, it's like prompt something else. So this goes back to something else I was reading, I guess in the article that you were in, where you touched on your spiritual gifts. All right, so what are, I guess, your or what do you deem as your spiritual gifts And yeah, what are spiritual gifts, and what do you deem as your spiritual gifts?
So spiritual gifts, I think, is just something that you get and you have innately.
Right.
Then depending upon the environment that you're in, it either gets squashed or it gets opened up or whatever the case. Well, I went through a lot of things like in my childhood, some of the things I've shared, and I just knew how to tell. Like I was just very intuitive. I could read a room. I could tell if somebody was like a bully, like if they had like a good spirit or a not so good spirit, or like whatever the case, I could tell those things and I could pick up on those things, and I would read because of like some of the things I experienced. I was hyper vigilant about those things, so I really paid attention to that. And then ADHD, so I hyper focused on it, and so that's why I'm really good one-on-one. I mean, my profession lends to really who I am, and really been able to look at all of these things. I'm also, because I've been through bullying, I've been through just a lot of different things. Like I'm very compassionate. I took a test. One of my mentors gave it to me like in 2015 or 2016, and it's Strengths Finder. And people are probably really familiar with that, especially in the corporate space, because people were using that to say, oh, they would put it in their resume and say, oh, I'm this, this, and this. So one of mine was like communication, surprise, empathy,
right.
What else? Learner. And my favorite one was developer, because and I was like, oh, that's perfect. Because I mean, sometimes, and I'll tell you, sometimes when of people, and sometimes it's so crazy when my clients or former clients, they'll hit me up and they'll be like, oh my gosh, like if you hadn't been in my life, like I would have never seen this. And of course I'm just like, what's the big deal? Like on a certain level, because I'm like, this is just kind of like who I am and what I do or whatever. But I do realize now that is a gift. So, my sister and I had a conversation and we were just talking about, discipline is a spiritual gift. Now, people don't see it as that. People don't see intellect as a spiritual gift. They just see it as intellect, not that is from God. And they think that anything unexplainable is spiritual. And that's not always true. It is a very spiritual practice to be disciplined to go to the gym, or disciplined to get up and go to work or whatever. And it's just like, the more we talked about it, she was like, yeah, like we got on like more on the same page. And so I told her, I said, I had these gifts. I said, we live in the world. I have to live by the world system in terms of rules. So in order to be able to practice in this way, I had to get licensure. I had to go to school. I had to do all of these things. Now, what I am seeing now more is that people are, using these gifts, and they're finding ways to utilize their gifts without credentialing and all these kind of things. And I think that's great. And I think that's fine. But the way for me to have sure money, because I had a kid to raise, I was like, man, I got to get these papers. You know what I'm saying? So I was just like, and I will never forget, I was working for the Department of Juvenile Justice. I was 25. It was like the year after my mom had passed. I was finally done with my bachelor's, because I didn't finish my bachelor's until 2005. I would have finished had I just gone for 4 years. I would have finished in 2001. But I had the baby, and I worked full time at Shaw, and I went to school. So when I got settled in that job, which it still remains like my favorite job. Those kids were off the chain, and I wasn't much older than them, so they would be like, "You crazy?" It was fun, like looking back. But I was getting in trouble on my job because I was getting too deep with the kids. I'm like literally a probation officer, but no, I want to know like the ADHD. I want to dig and dig and dig, and I want to know like, why do you keep coming here? Because you're so smart. And And so it was so wild. One of my professors, a Black woman, Dr. Cynthia Ratchford, who reminded me of my mom because she always wore red lipstick. She called me on my job and she said, Miss Jones, I didn't see your application for the MSW program, because it was the inaugural program. Like we were the first ones to go through it. And so I was like, I got a job. I'm good. And whatever. She was like, get your beep in and take that GRE and get it and get these credentials. And I'm forever indebted to her, for doing that, because it really did change like the trajectory of what I saw myself really doing in this work. And it was much bigger than the caseworkers who were weird to me, when I was a young mom trying to find my way.
Got you. Okay. Well, Erin, once again, thank you for coming on the show. I'm
so proud and excited for you. Like, this is dope. Like, this is like really, people on social media see like these instantaneous results that people have been doing things, but they don't know how long this has been in progress or in process, and that it doesn't always happen. Like, I'm telling you, I'm going to send you that podcast because it covered like so much of like what you said. It was really, really good.
Well, yeah, I can't wait to get it because, like I said, well, like you've been talking about, I don't know what it is. I might have to take a test because I'll get in and start watching it. And then once I see one, it's like, well, let me check out another one. Then I might spend the rest of my day on some other stuff that I ain't got no business doing, but I will check it out.
For sure.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on I Feel You, the podcast. We certainly appreciate having you on as a guest. And for everyone that's watching, I'm going to have links to Erin's, like her socials and her business page as well. So if you want to reach out to her for inquiries about being on the podcast or things of that nature, you can be sure to do that. And for everyone out there, I'd like to say thank you for joining us on I Feel You, the podcast. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.